Liberty Nation. Truth is making a comeback.
Hi, Lisa K. Donner here with Liberty Nation, and with me today is Scott Cosenza. Scott is our legal affairs editor, and I wanted him to come on today to talk a little bit about a story that's been swirling about the U.S. Supreme Court and a Mueller subpoena that seems to be, or at least they're calling it, mysterious. Welcome to LNTV, Scott.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right, so in your estimation, is this mysterious, or maybe let's just back up? What is going on?
This is a simple fight about a subpoena and whether a company has to comply with it. What's different about it and what gives it the air of mystery is that we don't know the identity of the company or its ownership. It's owned by a country. In other words, a country owns the corporation, and they're saying we don't want to comply with your subpoena. Now, that implicates what's called sovereign immunity. I'm sure it's a term that most people have heard of, but don't really think about that often. And it's the very notion that a sovereign, in this case, another country, has immunity and can't be hauled into our courts. Now, before in like the 1950s or maybe the 40s, no foreign country could be hauled into a U.S. court for any purpose. That law started to change as countries grew more and more into commercial businesses. So what that means is, if a company perhaps owned an airline, well, that's more of a commercial activity than it is like a state activity. And so our courts would allow you to, for instance, sue a foreign airline if they treated you poorly, for instance. Well, this implicates a criminal proceeding, and that's why it's a bit different. But the country that owns this corporation has said, we're not required to go into to submit to ourselves to the subpoena because we have sovereign immunity from it. Now, what's mysterious about it is the name of the company and the name of the country are both under seal. And,
okay, that's what I was going to ask you. I'm
yes.
like, well, what is this country and what is this company?
Yeah, so they're both under seal as part of the secret grand jury proceedings that we presume are part of the Mueller proceedings. It's not been announced that this is a Mueller proceeding case, but a sharp-eyed Politico reporter actually went to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals on the day an important filing was due and actually caught the lawyer in person asking for a filing and basically said, hey, I'm a reporter. Do you care to comment? And of course, that person said no. And then the court took the truly extraordinary step of clearing an entire floor of the courthouse so that the attorneys could go in and not be identified by reporters, because there are certain high-profile attorneys that could be identified just if you knew who the lawyer was. You might be able to tell who the corporation and the country were. So,
all right, let me just ask you this quickly. Is it a good educated guess to think that this is Russia?
I don't think so. I mean, the only way you could say that is that the Mueller investigation has focused on Russia/Ukrainian people and companies. So perhaps that might sort of lend a guess in that direction. But outside of just a sort of that's where the tide had seemed to be flowing, there's no other indication that it would be Russia.
All right, why is this called like such a mysterious thing?
Well, it's just because of those kind of out of the ordinary steps in order to maintain the anonymity, which wouldn't be present if there wasn't this flurry of activity around the Mueller investigation. Ordinarily, reporters don't camp out in courts of appeals waiting to discover the identity of an attorney to then discover the identity of that attorney's client.
Okay, so what is Chief Justice John Roberts' involvement here?
Okay, yeah, this is the part I thought, one of the parts I thought that was misreported. There's been some other headlines that say like Roberts intervenes or declines to intervene, and all this is the district court ordered the company to comply with the subpoena. So what happens is the grand jury says, we want to see all your records, or an attorney who is commanding the grand jury, perhaps Mueller or a member of his team. The grand jury issues the subpoena. The company says, we don't want to comply with the subpoena. We think we're not bound by law to do so. So we're going to appeal the subpoena. The appellate court says you still have to comply with the subpoena. We disagree that you don't have to comply. They say, okay, we're going to then appeal to the Supreme Court. Well, since the case originated in Washington, D.C. and through the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, each one of the U.S. Supreme Court justices handles emergency or sort of quick relief appeals from the various circuits. It just so happens that Roberts was assigned to handle appeals from the DC circuit when this company ran to the court. And here's what they said, Lisa. They didn't want an emergency ruling on the merits. What they did want was there are massive fines attached to non-compliance with the subpoena. So they just wanted the court to say, we don't have to pay those fines. They're not going to continue to accrue while we fight over whether or not we're bound by law to honor the subpoena or not. What often happens, which is what happened in this case, was he granted a limited stay. So he said, okay, we'll see if the Supreme Court wants to grant you that stay and not require you to pay these penalties or not. But while we make that determination, then for those limited days, we will stay the judgment of the lower court. Since that's happened, the Supreme Court has weighed in, and what they've said is we're not going to continue to stay this this request to quash the subpoena. And in fact, you do have to comply with the subpoena or suffer the consequences, which are those steep monetary penalties.
Okay, so does the country or the company have any recourse here?
I think not. They're going to have to pay or comply. That seems to be where things are. Your last stop's the Supreme Court. So,
alrighty. Well, maybe just all things Mueller seem to be mysterious to the media writ large. Thanks so much, Scott, for joining us today. Scott Cosenza. I'm Lisa K. Donner, LibertyNation.com. Please remember to subscribe, like us, comment, and hit our website, LibertyNation.com, where truth is making a comeback.